So we're going to jump ahead a few hundred years from the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution. Excuse me. The Industrial Revolution was another major era in human history. This is beginning in the late 1700s and moving into the 1800s, where more major technological advances were happening. In terms of printmaking, in this era, we see the invention of lithography, which is a process based on the idea that oil and water do not mix. Basically, you draw on a stone with something like a grease crayon, then you wet the stone down, and if you try to roll ink across that surface, only the places where that water has not adhered, so those oily crayon areas, anything that's designed to resist water, will pick up the ink. It's a process that you can do at home. If you Google paper lithography, there is kind of a fairly simple at-home method you can use with a piece of Xerox paper and a laser printed image. It's something that's still in use today. It is a fairly modern technology. One thing about lithography is that it allowed very aesthetically beautiful and multicolor images to be printed because, again, it's painted or drawn, it's done by hand. You don't have to carve or cast images or texts. And so color lithography, which develops over in this period, passed the aesthetic experience of colorful images from the privileged few to the whole of society. This dynamic, exuberant, and often chaotic century witnessed an astonishing parade of new technologies, imaginative forms, and new functions for graphic design. The 19th century, the 1800s, was an inventive and prolific period for all sorts of typefaces, printing, huge number of things were happening in this era. The important thing to remember here is we again see the democratizing nature of printmaking. One thing that lithography could be used for is to create full color images that looked hand drawn or hand painted, later on even photographic. Up until this time, a color image was basically a painting, an oil painting, and that was something only the richest people could afford. So again, people are able to see full color images for the first time because of this technological advancement. So the major invention of the Industrial Revolution, the thing that really kicks it all off, is James Watt's steam engine, which he perfected, which was deployed rapidly in the late 1700s. And animal and human power no longer had to be the primary sources of energy. So this is the first time that some other form of power that isn't just the exertion of a human or animal comes into play. And now, for the first time in almost 400 years, Gutenberg's printing press, which has been hardly changed since 1450, begins to be improved upon. First with the Stanhope press, which was very similar to Gutenberg's press, but was made out of cast iron, which was very heavy, required a lot less cranking power from the human because the press itself was so sturdy. And then later on by Koenig, who added the steam engine to the press and made it two-sided so that you could print a front and a back on two different directions. So basically, for about 400 years, printmaking does not change or improve at all. And then suddenly in the Industrial Revolution, we see a whole bunch of things changing. Metalworking can be done in a way that's mechanized, that's steam powered. All of these things can be built in a way that's much easier. You don't have an individual blacksmith having to build every single printing press. You can do these things because the steam engine has sped up progress so much. It's also important to think about the political situation at this time. In the 1700s, we have major democratic revolutions. Greater human equality sprang from the French and American revolutions and led to increased public education and literacy. The audience for reading matter proliferated accordingly. Graphic communications became more important and more widely accessible during this period of change. As with other commodities, technology lowered unit costs and increased the production of printed materials. In turn, the greater availability created an insatiable demand, and the era of mass communications dawned. So now that printing is becoming cheaper and faster, now that people are more and more involved in the political process, we have countries that are ruled by the people and for the people, not just by a king. People care about politics. There are revolutions going on. Things are changing. People want to spread their ideas. And the printing presses have gotten a lot faster and a lot more economical, so we can begin to spread those ideas. And then we have sort of a feedback loop. People are getting information, they want more information, this insatiable demand, and as we read in this quote, the era of mass communications dawns. There were several other major innovations during this era that allowed for printing to become much more economical. What you see on the left here is what was being used to apply ink by Gutenberg. It was basically a leather dabber. So you would put a ball of ink out, you would rub it around on this dabber, and then you would dab that across the surface. During the Industrial Revolution, people switched to, excuse me, rolling ink. So now you can create a roller on a press. But, oh, this is an example of a hand roller or a brayer, which we will be using as the term goes on. And you can quickly and rapidly apply ink to your surface. So this is cutting down more time from the process. Basically, from 1800 to 1827, printing improved so rapidly, that's a typo, that presses went from producing 250 single-sided sheets per hour to about 4,000 double-sided sheets per hour. So in 1800, we're talking about basically the Gutenberg press with few innovations. By 1827, we have metal presses that are steam-powered, we're rolling on ink, and we have taken what we could do before, 250 sheets an hour, and we have, what is that, 4 times 4, 16 times 2. We've created our output by 32 times, which is crazy to think about in the span of just 27 years. And it's crazy to think about what it would be like to live in that period. In 1800, printed material is beginning to be available, but by 1827, it's now 32 times more available, which is extremely rapid. As we continue in the 20th century, in the 19th century, another major invention is the Forerunner machine, which was basically a paper making machine that was invented, which is similar to the way we still make paper today. Instead of having to make paper sheets individually, this was a machine that poured a thin stream on a mesh conveyor belt, creating an unending roll of paper. So paper making, which again compared to parchment was a major leap forward, has now been mechanized and sped up. It's able to be done in a way that's sort of endless. You can make huge rolls of paper, you can ship them more easily, you can pack them more easily. So this is another step forward during the Industrial Revolution. And now the last major innovation we'll talk about, and this is happening at the end of the 1800s, so this is sort of where I want to cut us off in terms of the history of printmaking for your papers and projects, is the invention of the linotype. And this is a pretty fascinating machine that basically mechanized the process of laying out lines of type. From the early 1800s to the late 1800s, all these things are changing and speeding up, but the one thing that doesn't speed up is that people still have to by hand place every single letter, every single space, every single piece of punctuation on the print bed. And eventually the linotype is invented by Ottomar Mergenthaler. It's a keyboard. You type in the text, and that triggers hot metal to cast from reverse pieces of your letter forms and your spaces, and then it spits out literally a single line of type, therefore the linotype, and you can just very quickly and rapidly, without having to hand set type, create an entire page of text. And now here we also see the keyboard, which is something now that we take very much for granted, but was a major step forward at that point in time. So that's my very rapid history of printmaking, and I basically wanted to just give everyone an overview. I know I had you watch a couple videos about this so that we could just get the big picture of this technology, begin to think about how much it changed the world academically, politically, economically. It's been a huge source of upheaval in the world and has shaped our lives today in so many ways. So I've split you all into groups. I'm going to be emailing out some more information about that soon, and hopefully you've all got some ideas stewing. We will be asking for proposals about your paper and or project in the next week or so. So do start getting that together. We'll basically just want a couple sentences telling us what you're researching, what you're presenting on, what kind of format you're putting it in. Um, and that's all. So hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you again next week.